This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. This week, I'm going to talk to you about pop-up presentations. Pop-up presentations are awesome. They're a great thing to include in your classes. I include them not only in my classes, but also in my research lab, and it helps your students develop awesome skills. It helps them learn to think on the fly. It helps them learn to think in streamlined, organized ways. It helps them practice those 4 C's to be clear, complete, concise, and compelling. And it shares awesome, amazing stories with the rest of their audience. So I'm going to tell you more about them and why you should do them right now. When I'm talking about pop-up presentations, I'm using pop-up kind of like pop quiz. So it's something my students don't necessarily know is coming. Now, in my classes and in my research lab, they know it's a possibility. So it's not something I completely spring on them. They know it's a possibility in each class or in each lab meeting. But they don't always know when it's coming, and they won't know what it's going to be about. What will happen is I might turn to a student and say, Colleen, it's time for a pop-up presentation. And I'll give Colleen a topic and a time limit. So I might say, hey, I want to hear about the hypotheses of the research project you're working on, and you've got 60 seconds. Usually then what will happen is I'll give Colleen a few moments to prepare, and I'll talk to the rest of the class about an announcement or something that's coming up later in that class or that meeting. So Colleen will have a couple of moments to get ready for that pop-up presentation. Now for Colleen, what she's got to do is she's got to think about, I have 60 seconds to discuss the hypotheses. What is most essential to get my audience ready to hear them? So how much overview do I need to provide about my project? What terms am I going to have to define in setting that up? How am I going to lay out my hypotheses and justify them in 60 seconds? As you would imagine, this is a skill that's going to get better with practice, because the first time that Colleen or any of my students does this, they're probably going to have a hard time organizing that time. This is why we do them often. Oftentimes what they do the first time they do this is they're overambitious in what they try to include. So over time, they learn to get better at applying those 4 C's of being clear, complete, concise, and compelling. As I've talked about before, about using maximums when I teach, so rather than giving students a minimum amount of time or a minimum number of words or pages for an assignment, by giving them a maximum amount of time that's kind of short, like 60 seconds or 90 seconds, it's going to cause the student to spend time thinking about how to streamline that content as well as they can. I know that when I hear people give presentations or even just tell me about the stuff that they're working on, anytime the person starts to kind of ramble or starts to lose their way in their narrative, it's harder for me to keep up with them. So by keeping these short, they're usually going to be more direct and easier to follow for the audience. Now, as I have mentioned, these are going to take some time to get good at. So I imagine if you're going to use these well in your class, and this is what I try to do in mine when I use them in my class in my lab, do them early and do them often. Now, I do have to offer some caveats on this. First of all, if you're going to do this, make sure your students know the possibility that they will be coming and give them an idea about what that structure is going to be like. To truly surprise someone with this is going to create a lot of anxiety if they never expected the possibility. I find in my classes and in my research lab, students usually don't like their first pop-up or maybe even their first couple of pop-ups. But over time, they start to appreciate them. But do let them know they are going to get better with practice, and they're going to start to appreciate the skills that they're building in that experience over time. I highly recommend, if you're going to use pop-up presentations, that you do acknowledge the good things that students did in those presentations. For instance, in my lab, one of the things we'll do after a pop-up is we'll go around the room and give the presenter 2 bits of advice. The first is something that we really liked that they did. The second is something that they can improve. And that second one is always framed constructively. Also, when doing these, I recommend doing them early and often. Making sure that all of your students can have the opportunity to do this is going to show that you're not just calling out a single student. So this should never be a punishment. This is an opportunity for your student to share something valuable with the rest of your class or your research team. Another caveat I want you to offer is that understand because you are building a skill. An oral presentation is a skill that students don't often have the opportunity to practice. You're building a skill. It is a marketable skill, but a difficult one. You yourself will need to be patient as your students build that skill. One of the things that I've said before is we should not expect our students to be able to do things that we haven't taught them to do. So be prepared to teach your students how to present. Now, I love pop-ups. One of the reasons that I love pop-ups is I think it builds community in my class and on my research team. It's a great way for them to give feedback to each other. It's a great way for them to share the ideas and the things that they're working on. So we actually learn more about each other, both as people and in terms of the professional pursuits that we're engaged in through pop-up presentations. And your pop-up can be about anything. I've talked about it in the context of presenting a research study. It also could be an introduction of that student to the rest of the team. It could be recommendations for success in your class or your lab. It can literally be about anything. Another reason why I love pop-ups is it provides that opportunity for feedback. And that feedback is normative. So you understand that everybody, because they have to, is going to give you a constructive bit of advice about something you could improve. And they're going to balance that with an actual positive comment about something that you did that they liked. So by setting up that normative feedback, that we're going to get reinforced for the things that we did well, but also coached up on the things that maybe we can improve, takes away some of the bite of criticism. I've found that a lot of that constructive criticism comes in two forms. One of that is going to be the substance of that presentation itself. So how to frame hypotheses, for instance, the terms that should be defined, the jargon that maybe should be minimized. The other is going to be the stylistic, about how to connect to your audience and tell a good story. And I think getting feedback on both of those domains is really, really helpful. Now, probably the biggest reason that I love pop-ups is it's actually creating a skill set for your students that they can use in other places. One of the places that I've seen this really kind of generalize, these pop-up skills, is in interviews. A lot of my students tell me that when they go interviews for graduate school or for jobs, that this helped them along the way. In fact, one of my students talked about a recent interview that she had. The advice she had for students who are still in the lab is to embrace the pop-up. So I think overall, pop-ups are a wonderful way to build presentation skills, which is important for your students' professional development, but also to clearly, completely, concisely, and compellingly share the things that they're doing with each other. I love pop-ups. I hope you'll love them too, and I hope your students will eventually love them too. In the comments below, I would love to hear how you use pop-ups or something like that in your teaching. And if you have any questions or reservations about pop-ups, let me know that too. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.